Every now and again, a viewer to this channel will reach out to me and say, I can see what's going on in the modern world, but why? Why do we have this enforced mass migration? Why do we have this cultural erosion you can see across Europe? Why do we see things such as marriage and family demeaned, while things such as individual pleasure and pride marches get promoted? Now, this video aims to answer that question, and I think it's worth saying there are some people out there that just want to see the world burn. There are other people out there who've been brainwashed into believing that destroying the Western world is somehow noble. Yet these groupings alone aren't nearly enough to affect the change that we've seen in the Western world. The reality is that the fundamental problems we face go back to our economic system. And why is that? Well, it's only via the global economic system that you can get the elites on board and keep the system in check. Now, I know many of you watching this may well be right-leaning, and it's something of a hard sell to people who lean right to talk about free markets and the economy being behind much of our modern troubles. I once thought like that, however, I have come to the opposite opinion and realised that our economic system is at the root of these things. Yet the theory goes something like this. The West adopted a free market ideology really on the back of the battle with Soviet communism. One was very hard left, one became very laissez-faire right. Now, there's no doubt that the West won that argument. Communism was a total disaster. Henceforth, we started to have this almost religious style faith in the market. That's namely represented in something like Thatcherism. Now, I'm not saying that Thatcher was completely wrong in everything she said, but I think many on the right have overlooked a massive issue with regards to free markets and Reaganomics and so on. That is, that essentially the whole of the right-wing project has become about money and economic standards. Now, the obvious downside of that is that the right left the arenas of philosophy, political philosophy and culture wide open for the left to exploit, and boy did they. Our whole culture is now totally wokeified. What's more interesting and also lesser mentioned is despite the right wing still championing free markets largely, many have failed to see that those same free markets are actually promoting the same woke views that the right often oppose. Just look at all these giant corporations that have a pride flag as their logo. If you dive into these corporations, you'll also see that they're fully on board with woke programs like DEI and ESG. So I would contend that something has happened here which has actually led to much of the right being hoodwinked into supporting the very same system that's promoting their own demise. Now, while it seems a bit bizarre to say this in our day and age, historically the right-wing, conservatism, traditionalism was more than about money. Since the dawn of free markets, that's become the core focus of the right. It's what the left will criticise the right for all the time. But if you go back in time, the concerns are much more to do with the people, the nation, the great tradition that binds us and leads us into a positive future. In other words, we've switched from something transcendent, even a spiritual sense of who we are as a people, to something very materialistic and worldly. Now, note here, I'm not necessarily saying capitalism in and of itself is wrong. I'm saying it's about where we put our attention. If our attention is purely on profit, we're going to fall into a material realm which is innately going to destroy the traditions of our own country. If our focus is on the people, we can defend ourselves against that. However, because we've embraced an approach where greed is good and money and profit must come first, we've seen banks get so big they're now too big to fail. On top of that, we have corporations that are so massive, they can actively dictate the cultural policy of the Western world, maybe even the globe now. This is why we now have absurdities like Barclays Bank going absolutely mad when it comes to Pride Month. Or if you look into the Middle East, they're having awards for women entrepreneurs in business. Are these ideas coming from the Middle East or Islam? No, of course not. These things are coming from Western liberalism and the power of the corporate Western system. And what we can see here is the economic system and the massive corporations therein having the power to undermine the cultural traditions of a given nation, region, and even religion. But why do they want to do that? Now, there are many reasons this is the case, but they can be encapsulated in one simple concept. A lot of these left-wing cultural ideals about things such as inclusion and equality and this diversity and so forth, these may seem very leftist in tone, but they actually play in to the globalist economic system because it essentially breaks down borders. This is very positive for the global economic system because the only thing that can truly stand up against it are strong nation states that are willing to protect their own interests. However, if you can control that, it's much easier to ensure the capital flows smoothly over borders and you can import a new working class from the third world at a cheaper rate to keep economies pumping. In essence, the economic system uses the leftist system to enforce its own desires. For instance, if Barclays decide next year they won't bother with Pride, what do you think would happen? Well, they would face an absolute public image storm. Millions of people in the Western world have been brainwashed into leftism, and they would do the work for the economic system. They'd absolutely smash them on Twitter and so on. The irony is these leftist lovies with their Che Guevara t-shirts think they're doing the opposite of the bidding of the economic system, but they're actually the frontline orcs engaging in exactly what the economic system wants. This has led to the aforementioned ESG ratings, that's environment, social and governance, especially enforced wokeness across the corporate world. This is why mass immigration never goes down. Despite what politicians say, it always goes up. Why? Because they're in the pockets of big business. This is why feminism has been so heavily pushed across the Western world. A, it allows more tax to be brought into the state, and B, it brings more people into the economic system and allows that to inflate and grow. To understand this, let's break down what the nation really is. Traditionally, it begins with the family, and the family has a traditional nuclear structure. The leadership of the father, the loving mother, raising good, healthy children with a strong sense of who they are to go and do good in the world. Our present economic system and the leftist dominant culture hates the nuclear family. It does not want women at home serving the family. It wants them at work serving their corporate masters, giving tax dollars to the state and inflating the economy. This is why the supposed strong, independent woman who don't need no man is represented heavily by the corporate world and the leftist ideology alike as the best thing a woman can possibly be these days. Now that is, for me, a traditionalist, a sin against nature. There is nothing more beautiful, important and special that a woman can do than give birth to children. Now, if a modern woman in London or New York or Stockholm heard me say something like that, they'd be absolutely aghast. They'd think I'm just full of hate, that I want to control them, that I don't care about them one bit. Of course, that's not the case at all. Traditionalists care about people and their well-being more than the economic system, I would say. However, they've been totally brainwashed into believing the economic system and feminism has their best interests in mind. The only problem here would be for the economic system that these women aren't producing any children to come in and be batteries for the next generation of the system. However, they've of course covered that problem via mass immigration from the third world. Again, as a traditionalist, I don't like mass immigration from the third world. It destroys the structure and integrity of a nation and its culture, as well as undermining our own working class. We've seen a massive decline in the sense of purpose and the health of our working class across Europe, and it's ultimately because they've been forgotten by the political mainstream. They're now the butt of every joke. So we find ourselves in a chaotic and extremely challenging situation. Wokeness has taken over everything. The globalist system is extraordinarily powerful. However, there is hope in the reawakening of our old traditions, in standing by the nation. That may even mean for me the continent of Europe now, so we have more power to stand against this absolute behemoth. For me, this is the only way we'll stand any chance of challenging the global hegemony of the powers that be. However, I do think there is an awakening going on across Europe, and that always means we do have hope going into the future. I intend to make more content of this nature and on that in the near future. These are always just my thoughts, however, do let me know what you think down below. Do consider subscribing to the channel.